Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the MSI Prestige 14 Evo. It's a thin and light laptop, measures just about 0.63 inches thick, weighs just about 2.84 pounds, makes it pretty portable and easy to carry around, and it's not a bad looking laptop with sort of this dark gray design and this shiny beveled edge here with the metallic blue. But the reason that I'm testing this one is because it was sent to me by the folks at Intel to test the Intel Core i7-1185G7 processor, which is one of the most powerful Core i7 U series chips to date. And so it's in this notebook along with 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD, which is one of the fastest SSDs I've tested to date. And you'll notice a bunch of other interesting features, like the fact that it logged in almost immediately when I opened the lid, and that's because we've got this Windows Hello compatible infrared camera. We've also got a very wide touchpad here with a fingerprint sensor, so you can use that instead. Or, of course, you can just type in your password. While we're looking at the keyboard, you might notice it is backlit. Also supports multiple levels of brightness. So there's a bunch of neat little features here, and there's some more things in the keyboard that I'll go over momentarily. But let's start with the processor, because as I mentioned, it is sort of one of the key selling points for this laptop, which has a list price of around $1,150. It sells for around $1,000 on sale sometimes, or maybe $1,050. And is it worth that price? Well, stay tuned to find out. But it is one of the fastest laptops that I've tested. And you might not notice that for basic web work or web browsing. I did manage to use this with, up to 2,000 browser tabs open while editing images, writing the written version of this review, which you can find at liliputing.com, and it was fine for that. But honestly, I don't need necessarily one of the fastest Intel Core U series processors to do those things. When you run synthetic benchmarks, you really start to see what it can do. And then, of course, when you do more demanding tasks like editing audio and video and so forth. It's also an interesting device because it's got customizable CPU power. So there's this MSI Center software, which allows you to adjust the performance without entering the BIOS or changing anything. So the Intel Core U series Tiger Lake processors, 11th generation chips, they tend to run around 15 watts, but they can run lower or higher. And usually that means between 12 watts and 28 watts. But here we actually even have more options than that. So let's go ahead and open up this HW info. And if you look up here, you can sort of see I don't know how well this comes across on video, but I'll read a little bit of it to you, see what the CPU speed is. And right now it's not real high. It's around 1.2, 1.3 gigahertz. And down here, you can see we're only consuming about 1.2, 1.6 watts of power because, well, we're running an idle. But we have the option of switching between different modes. So we've got high performance, balanced, silent, and super battery. If we look over here, we'll see the PL1 and PL2 power limits, and those are sort of the upper limits of what it can consume. And right now we're in higher performance mode, so it's at 41.5 for the PL1 and 51 for the PL2. Under balanced, that'll drop down to 36 and 51. Silent, it'll drop down a little more, I think. Yep, here we are, 15 and 28 watts. And so this is designed to make sure that the fans don't get too loud and that you can sort of have a pleasant experience when you're using the device. And super battery is really meant to extend the battery life. That's something you might want to do, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But it does limit your power consumption to 10 watts for both PL2 and PL1. So under this mode, you can see the screen dimmed. Maybe my camera didn't pick that up as much, but we went down to 10% panel brightness. Keyboard brightness went to the minimum, as opposed to high performance where everything sort of gets brighter, the keyboard gets brighter, and you get more power consumption there. You also have the choice of going into the fan settings, and you only get this with the high performance mode where you can go to cooler booster, and the fans just kick into high gear, or auto, which is what it is normally for everybody else. Or there's even an advanced mode here where you can go in and choose custom settings depending on different CPU temperatures. So I can say that, I want the fan to go this far when the temperature hits a certain level. So I'm just going to discard that. And we can have CPU and GPU performances adjustments there. So overall, it's pretty powerful that you get the option to adjust those settings. In terms of actual scores for benchmarks, it does really well in general purpose CPU tests like Passmark and PCMark and Geekbench. It does reasonably well in 3D graphics benchmarks like 3D Mark. Comes close to an entry-level discrete GPU because it's got Intel Iris Xe graphics. So overall, I'm pretty impressed with the performance. I'm a little bit less impressed with battery life. When I just set it up to stream video from YouTube for as long as I could before the battery died, it only got around 7 hours and 20 minutes. And that's kind of substandard for a 2021 laptop, if you ask me. When I used it to do work, like you saw that I wrote most of the actually pretty much the entire written review for this device using nothing but this laptop, it only goes for about 4.5 hours in my tests. Now, I've seen other people get a little bit more, and maybe by switching to the power saver mode, you could get more, but on the balance mode, which is what I used for pretty much all of the tests, only about 4.5 hours, and that's less than stellar. Now, the good news is it is pretty easy to charge. It comes with this 65 watt power adapter. It's a USB-C power adapter, and it connects to the ports over here. We've got 2 Thunderbolt ports, and that's pretty nice to have because in addition to being able to charge from this adapter, pretty much anything that cranks out enough power will work. So I've used it with a 45 watt adapter meant for a different device, and it charges relatively quickly. So I, as somebody who really covers portable notebooks pretty regularly and really enjoys being able to have all-day battery life from a device that I can take and not have to worry about plugging in, I find the 4.5 hours to 7 hours to be pretty underwhelming. But not everybody puts that as their top priority, and if you really want to sort of value performance and don't mind plugging in once or twice a day, this device isn't so bad. Those Thunderbolt ports also mean that you can connect docks. So if you wanted to, you could use something like this. This is actually from Pine 64, the makers of the Pine phone and Pine Book cheap laptop. This is just a USB and HDMI and Ethernet adapter, and I could plug this into any of those ports and it would work just fine for connecting Ethernet. So third-party docks would work just fine, and you should be able to connect even a third-party graphics dock if you really wanted to use this with external graphics for gaming, and I think it would probably work reasonably well for that. It does come with one adapter, which is this Ethernet adapter. So there are no full-size Ethernet ports, but you can plug this in if you want Ethernet. It goes into the single USB Type A port here on the side. Seems a little weird that it's not a USB-C adapter, that instead it's USB-A. Also, it seems a little bit weird that on a $1,000 plus laptop, this is a USB 2.0 port. So the only USB-A port tops out at USB 2 speeds. A little underwhelming, but it is what it is. We also have a micro SD card slot here and a headset jack, and that's it for your ports. But again, with those Thunderbolt ports, you get a lot of possibilities. You might have noticed that it's got this sort of drop hinge. So when I lift the lid, it raises the back of the laptop, and that does a couple of things. One is it gives me a little bit of an angle here, which is fairly comfortable for typing, and I find that overall typing is a pretty good experience on this laptop. Wow, that keyboard looks really bright, so let's just dim that a little bit. And you can also open it all the way to 180 degrees. So that allows you to sort of pick any level where you think it's going to be comfortable to have a typing experience. Or you can even lie it down flat, stand over it, look at presentations with multiple people, do whatever it is that you would want to do. It's not a convertible. It doesn't go any farther than that, but that's as far as it goes. Also, while it's up, if you look, I don't know how well this comes across, but the exhaust vents are right here. So that's where, when you hear the fans, they're blowing the air out this way. It does get a little bit warm on the bottom here under sort of heavy load. It can also get a little bit warm on the top. It gets warmer on the bottom, but because that hinge sort of lifts the bottom, you might not necessarily feel it, even if you were putting this on your lap for use. Speaking of the bottom, we've got sort of bumper here and here. There's about 7 different screws that you would remove to take the bottom off. And if you did that, you would notice that you've got 2 fans and a removable SSD. The RAM is soldered to the motherboard, so it's nice that it comes with 16, but if you wanted 32, it's just not an option. The 512 gig SSD could be removed and replaced, but it's got, fairly large amount of room, and it's also, as I mentioned, one of the fastest SSDs that I have used to date. So if you looked at the benchmarks that I have on the written version of this review, I think it has read speeds, sequential read speeds, over 4,000 Mbps and write speeds of 2500 or so. So it's pretty zippy and comfortable to use. A couple of other things that I wanted to point out here. The camera, which this is pretty much par for the course these days, I think, but it's a 720p camera. It's not really great, but it's better than not having a camera at all. So in a fairly well-lit room, you know, you can see me, I'm talking, it's fine. It's a little bit grainy. You do get the little light indicator up there flashing that lets you know that the camera is running. I would like to see higher quality cameras, but I think a lot of the current designs are probably in the pipeline since pre-pandemic, and so it's not surprising that 720p is still the standard. But here's a nice feature. On the keyboard, there is a switch that you can turn off the camera just as easily as that. It just disappears and it comes back on momentarily if you just press it again. There we go. Seems to take a little bit longer to initialize than it does to disable, but it is a nice feature to have. So that's nice. Also on the keyboard, you've got a power switch button. So I showed you those power settings. You can toggle between them without opening that software. Now this only works in Windows because it is tied to that software. So if you wanted to try a different operating system, and I was able to load Linux on this, for instance, or run Ubuntu off a USB flash drive, that button doesn't do anything because there's no MSI Center software. But you can adjust the keyboard brightness, the display brightness, the volume. All of those things work out of the box in Ubuntu. The camera didn't seem to be detected at all. There's also a microphone off switch. Let me turn off the keyboard light here just so you can see that when the microphone is off, that little light glows. Same happens when you hit the mute button. And there's also a keyboard or a touchpad disable button. Press that and nothing happens here. Press it again. I would like a status indicator there, but it's fairly obvious if you reach down and nothing is happening, what's going on, which is that you might have accidentally pressed that button when you hadn't meant to. So overall, in terms of features, I think it's a pretty nice device. In terms of performance, I'm reasonably impressed with it. One thing that took me a little while to get used to, and other people might be more comfortable with this, is that the function key is over here instead of where I'm used to having it on the left side. And because I use home and end pretty frequently, that means I have to get used to not pressing function here and then page up, page down to get those home and end buttons, but function here and do it with that hand. It's not a deal breaker, but it took some getting used to. But again, if you go into the MSI Center software, there is actually an option somewhere. There we go. To switch it. So instead of using this as your Windows key, I can switch it so that now this is my function key, and that's my Windows key. So that's kind of a nice feature. And also you can see that you can actually disable the webcam from here, and then it's just not going to be accessible no matter what you do. So yeah, that's the MSI Prestige 14 Evo. It's a thin, light, and powerful laptop with, I don't think I even mentioned this, it's got a matte display. So it's a rainy day out. I'd like to shoot these videos in natural light instead of using the light above me, but you can see even when it's pointing directly at the light, you've got a little bit of a halo effect there, but it's not glossy, it's not shiny. And so that's kind of a nice feature. Not everybody loves a matte screen, but I know some people are really fond of them. And because this is not a touchscreen display, I think it was a little bit easier to put that matte screen in. It does mean that the screen itself is not edge to edge. There's like a little indent here, and maybe that might be a little place for dust can collect, but overall, I think it's a decent trade-off. So I like the design of this laptop. I like the performance of this laptop. There's a lot that I really like about this laptop. I just don't love the battery life is a little bit less than stellar. I don't love that there's a USB 2.0 port as the only USB-A port. And one more thing that I forgot to mention is that the keyboard has a little bit of flex to it, as does the lid, which is made of aluminum. So if you sort of push down, you can see maybe a little bit that it's not incredibly sturdy there. Overall, though, you know, none of those things I think are deal breakers to me as much as the battery life. But as for the core i7-1185G7 processor that I was sent this device to test, I am reasonably impressed with that, especially with that ability to sort of kick into high gear when you need the extra performance, but then it can shift to an energy saving mode when you don't necessarily need it. occurs to me that I haven't done my usual, let's do a little video.
Feels weird. Picking it up.
Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the 1X Player handheld gaming PC with an 8.4-inch display surrounded by game controllers. You can long press it to enable mouse mode. So now instead of, and I can press it, it's UEFI settings, for instance, or I can go to the UEFI shell. And to navigate. So there you go. Video works. The speakers are not incredibly loud, and they don't have a lot of bass. That's not unexpected, but yeah, it's a little bit disappointing if you're looking for a multimedia machine. You might want to use headphones. You might want to plug in something. The speakers are bottom firing as well. They're right down here. And again, if you want to know what this device looks like with the lid taken off, so you can see on the inside, you can find some pictures of that at liliputing.com, where you'll also find benchmark results, Linux performance notes, and so on. So this video is going to go right here in the review, and you can check out that review for more details. This notebook is available for purchase for, like I said, around $9.99 and up from different retailers, and you can find a link in the description to this video. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and the MSI Prestige Evo 14, or Prestige 14 Evo, loaned to us by Intel for testing purposes, and it's a pretty nice little laptop for folks who don't care that much about battery life.